The year was 1979, and a heavy silence had fallen over the Newport Beach residence of the man the world knew as the Duke. John Wayne, an icon who had strode across the silver screen like a colossus for over 50 years, was facing his final sunset. But this wasn't a scene from a movie. There were no cameras, no directors, and no stuntmen to take the fall. It was just a man and his legacy. As he sat in his study, the air thick with the scent of old leather and the salt of the Pacific Ocean, Wayne began to reflect on the industry he helped build. He saw a Hollywood that was rapidly changing, moving away from the rugged individualism and moral clarity that he had championed in every frame of his films. He felt a deep, gnawing concern that the values of honor, courage, and sacrifice were being traded for cheap thrills and cynical narratives. This concern wasn't just a fleeting thought, it was a mission. He decided that his final act wouldn't be on a film set, but in the pages of his last will and testament, a document that would contain a secret warning for the future of the American spirit. For decades, John Wayne had been more than just an actor. He was a living symbol of a specific American ideal. From the dusty trails of Stagecoach to the blood-soaked sands of Iwo Jima, he had embodied a code of conduct that resonated with millions. However, by the late 70s, he sensed a shift in the cultural tides. The studio system he knew was evaporating, replaced by a new era of filmmaking that he found increasingly alien. He spent his final nights awake, staring at the shadows on the wall, contemplating how to ensure that the message of his life wouldn't be lost in the noise of a changing world. He called his most trusted legal advisors and his closest family members for a series of private meetings that were shrouded in secrecy. He wasn't interested in just dividing his ranches or his investments. He was drafting a manifesto. He wanted to leave behind a directive that would act as a guardian for the stories Hollywood chose to tell long after he was gone. This wasn't about ego. It was about the survival of the hero's journey in its purest form. The atmosphere in those meetings was described as intense and deeply emotional. Wayne, despite his failing health, possessed a clarity of mind that commanded the room. He spoke with a gravelly voice about the importance of the code, a set of unwritten rules that he believed were the backbone of a strong society. He was worried that future generations of filmmakers would forget that a hero's true strength lies not in his muscles, but in his character. He began to dictate a specific clause, a hidden message intended for the ears of the industry's power players. It was a warning against the commercialization of the soul and the betrayal of the audience's trust. He believed that the stories told on the screen had the power to shape the dreams of children and the resolve of a nation, and he viewed the corruption of that power as a betrayal of the highest order. This secret clause was being meticulously woven into the legal fabric of his estate, a time bomb of integrity set to go off when the world needed it most. As word of these secret meetings began to leak out into the corridors of power in Los Angeles, the industry held its breath. People wondered if the Duke was planning a final strike against his political enemies or if he was making a grand gesture to save his favorite charities. But the truth was far more profound. Wayne was looking at the long arc of history. He had seen the rise and fall of empires, the horrors of war, and the triumphs of the human spirit, and he knew that the only thing that truly lasts is character. He was crafting a legacy that couldn't be bought, sold, or traded on a studio lot. Every word he chose for his final testament was a bullet aimed at mediocrity and a shield for the values he held dear. He was a man preparing for a ride into the great beyond, but he was making sure his horse was saddled and his guns were clean for the journey that his name would continue to take in his absence. In the quiet moments between legal consultations, Wayne would often look at his old movie posters, not with pride, but with a sense of duty. He felt he owed it to the men he had portrayed, the sheriffs, the soldiers, the pioneers, to protect the integrity of their image. He didn't want the name John Wayne to become a hollow brand. He wanted it to remain a standard for excellence. This obsession with his posthumous influence was seen by some as a final manifestation of his legendary stubbornness, but to those who knew him best, it was an act of supreme love for his craft and his country. He was building a wall against the tide of cynicism that he saw rising on the horizon, using the only tools he had left, his name, his will, and his unwavering conviction. The secret warning he was preparing was a testament to his belief that even in death, a man's voice can still thunder across the plains if he speaks the truth with enough courage. The drafting of the secret clause was not merely a legal task. It was an emotional exorcism for a man who had seen the best and worst of the industry. John Wayne spent countless hours debating with his attorney, seeking the exact phrasing that would bypass the bureaucratic layers of the Hollywood elite and strike at the heart of the matter. He was obsessed with the idea that the new Hollywood was losing its moral spine. To him, the increasing trend of the anti-hero, the protagonist who lacked a moral compass, was a dangerous departure from the storytelling that built the nation's character. He argued that if the screen stopped reflecting the difference between right and wrong, the audience would soon lose their ability to distinguish it in reality. This was the core of his secret warning, a call for the preservation of the classic hero who stands for something greater than himself, even at the cost of his own life. As the winter of 1979 deepened, Wayne's physical strength was waning, but his mental resolve only grew sharper. He began to include specific instructions for how his image and his name should be managed in the future. He didn't want to be a mascot for every commercial product that came along. He wanted his likeness to be a seal of quality and integrity. He feared a future where digital manipulation or corporate greed would strip away the humanity of his characters, turning him into a hollow caricature of a cowboy. In his private diaries, he wrote about the theatrical plague, his term for films that prioritized shock value over substance. He believed that Hollywood had a sacred duty to provide hope and inspiration, and his secret clause was designed to be a permanent reminder of that obligation to every studio head who would eventually inherit his legacy. The tension during these secret sessions was palpable. His family watched as the Duke, even while tethered to an oxygen tank, fought for the survival of his principles with the same intensity he once used to defend a fort on screen. He was particularly concerned about the influence of foreign interests and corporate conglomerates that were beginning to swallow up the old movie studios. He believed that these entities, driven solely by the bottom line, would eventually sanitize the rugged, unfiltered truth of the American West. His warning was a direct challenge to these future owners, to never let the flame of authentic American storytelling be extinguished by the cold winds of global marketing. He wanted the dust of the trail and the sweat of the saddle to remain real, not some polished, plastic version of history designed for mass consumption. Wayne also addressed the upcoming generation of actors in his final directives. He felt that the craft was becoming too much about the self and not enough about the service. He left a message of advice that was to be shared with those who would follow in his footsteps, that a great actor must first be a great man, and that true stardom is a burden of responsibility, not a ticket to excess. He viewed his career as a long dialogue with the American public, a conversation built on trust and mutual respect. He feared that if actors lost their connection to the common man, the industry would lose its soul. This part of his will was a plea for humility and hard work, reminding the stars of tomorrow that they are merely the vessels for stories that belong to the people. As the legal document neared completion, it became a source of both comfort and controversy within his inner circle. Some felt the Duke was being too rigid, that he was trying to control a future that was no longer his to shape. But Wayne remained unmoved. He knew that the only way to fight the erosion of values was to leave behind a foundation that was impossible to ignore. He saw his will as his final searcher's mission, a journey into the unknown to rescue the future of his art form. He was aware that he wouldn't be there to see if his warning was heeded, but he believed that the mere existence of his secret clause would serve as a conscience for Hollywood, a ghostly presence in the boardroom that would make the executives think twice before betraying the Duke's code. The final signature on John Wayne's will was more than just a legal requirement. It was the closing of a chapter in American history. As the pen left the paper for the last time, those in the room felt the weight of a monumental legacy being sealed for eternity. The Duke had done his part. He had fought the battles, ridden the miles, and now he had laid down the law for those who would follow. In the months after his passing in June 1979, the world mourned a man who had become a living monument. But behind the scenes, the legal machinery of his estate began to move, and the secret clauses he had meticulously drafted started to reach the desks of the industry's most powerful figures. It wasn't a demand for money or power, but a demand for memory. He wanted Hollywood to remember that it had a responsibility to the truth, even when the truth was uncomfortable or out of fashion. For years, the specific details of Wayne's warning remained a subject of intense speculation within the film community. Rumors swirled about a blacklist of values or a set of strict requirements for any project bearing his name. But the reality was far more subtle and profound. The Duke's secret legacy was a challenge to the very soul of filmmaking. He had requested that his estate prioritize projects that celebrated the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of traditional honor. He wanted his name to be a shield against the tide of nihilism that he saw creeping into the arts. This wasn't about censorship, it was about choice. He wanted there to be a place in the world for stories where the hero wins not because he is the strongest, but because he is the most just. This quiet influence began to shape the way his image was used in the decades to follow, ensuring that the Wayne brand remained a symbol of rugged integrity in an increasingly plastic world. Today, as we look back at the cinematic landscape of the 21st century, the Duke's warning feels more prophetic than ever. In an age of digital clones and fragmented narratives, the simplicity and strength of Wayne's vision stand out like a lighthouse in a storm. The industry often tries to reinvent the hero, to make him more complex or more relatable, but the audience still craves the clarity that the Duke provided. His secret clause was a reminder that some things never change: the need for courage, the value of a man's word, and the importance of standing up for what is right, even when you are standing alone. Hollywood may have changed its technology, but it can never change the fundamental human need for the stories that John Wayne dedicated his life to telling. The legend didn't die in 1979. It simply transformed into a standard of excellence that every new generation of filmmakers must eventually confront. In his final days, Wayne reportedly said that he wanted his tombstone to read Fio, fuerte y formal, ugly, strong, and dignified. It was a Spanish proverb that captured the essence of his existence. He wasn't interested in being pretty or popular. He wanted to be substantial. His will was the ultimate expression of that desire. He left behind a world that was richer for his presence and a roadmap for a future that would desperately need his brand of strength. As the final credits roll on this story, let us remember the Duke not just as a movie star, but as a guardian of the American soul. He was a man who knew that his time was short, but that his message was timeless. He saddled up for one last ride into history, leaving the gate open for anyone brave enough to follow the trail he blazed with honor, grit, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. Thank you for traveling with us through these 26 chapters of Hollywood history. The story of John Wayne is a story of all of us, our dreams, our failures, and our enduring hope for a better tomorrow. As you move forward, carry the Duke's code with you. Be strong, be fair, and never apologize for doing what is right. The trail continues, the stars are bright, and the legacy of the man they called the Duke will burn as long as there is a campfire in the heart of a dreamer. Until we meet again on the next journey, keep your eyes on the horizon and your heart in the saddle. Ride on, Duke. The legend is safe in our hands. Good night, and God bless the trail ahead.